Good morning. Bill Pardue, I'm the Chairman and CEO of Weather Analytics. Three basic topics I wanted to cover with you this morning. The first is a challenge from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. The second is a really powerful convergence, and the third is an absolutely huge cloud. First, I want to address Britt. So, Britt, before you ask me the questions, A, the data is available. 2, the technology is here to deploy the data. And 3, there are decision support tools to put a price on risk, to use Nikhil's phrase. So those, I think, were your primary questions right off the bat.
So are you done?
If y'all want to hear about the CIA, I'm not done, but otherwise the answer is yes. Okay. And I'll close with a brief tribute to the flood insurance whisperer. But let's start with the Central Intelligence Agency. About 3 years ago, the CIA used its private venture capital fund to reach out to find a source of information regarding changes in the climate and the atmosphere all around the world to understand better several things. One, the level of risk and how to select and examine risk, to be situationally aware, and then to manage that risk all around the world as associates to the weather and the climate. The partner that the CIA's venture fund chose to develop this program, to develop really granular understanding of weather development down to 1 square city block, was Weather Analytics. The convergence, topic number 2, Senator Brandes pointed out, what we've got going on really is very clearly identified market needs of people wanting to protect their assets and protect their families. So 1, market needs. 2, the advances in the computing. Absolutely, a price can be put on risk now. And then number 3 development would be money being left on the table. Meaning when you have the development of the information and the technology and a market need, there's money to be made based on those 3 elements. First, though, I did, besides just trying to answer Britt's questions, I want to thank also Tim Gardner. Everything that you're going to be seeing today was developed in partnership with Guy Carpenter, giving us a really fantastic understanding of market needs. And that I couldn't actually thank you two gentlemen enough. This convergence that I was talking about, the atmosphere is stunningly dynamic. And we have not, as a country or a world in our weather organizations, been able to understand the dynamics of the atmosphere in a real-time and near real-time basis well enough to make very good decisions. The data that you're going to see here that was collected and deployed to assess risk associated with flash flooding and river flooding totals 1.1 billion data measurements. What's a data measurement? 6 p.m. in Tampa on 2004, July 3rd, how much did it rain? That's 1 data measurement. So what you're going to be seeing on the maps and the index that we're sharing, 1.1 billion. Second is there are 2 primary types of information presented here. One is precipitation, and the second is surface conditions. And by surface conditions, we mean soil moisture, soil temperature, soil type, water runoff, all feed into surface conditions, and also impervious layers such as concrete. The reason all this data is important, and it's not the data, it's 2 business reasons. 1, to be able to assess risk and select risk for business reasons. And then number 2 is to be able to manage the portfolio of risk that you have decided to undertake in insuring. We heard Jonathan talk about coastal flooding, and then we heard a great presentation from David looking at both coastal and inland. What we're going to do together now is we're going to break the inland flooding into 2 components. First, we're going to talk about flash floods, and then we're going to talk about river floods. The flash floods are really significant in Florida, perhaps more than any place else in the country. We have deployed the 600,000 grids system that was built by Guy Carpenter, and we have used them there. Each grid is about 1 square city block, 1 square city block, let's say in Manhattan. We have used thousands of sources of information and data sources over a decade to create our index. It looks at both the surface conditions on a 1 square city block basis, and then hourly precipitation during these 10 years. The levels of exposure run from a 0 to a 1, and what you see on this map, the bright red, the bright sort of burnt orange, that's the highest level of exposure, and then the very pale green would be the least level of exposure. We have not applied David's models that then assign a level of risk. What we're doing is the data that can be used then to assign risk, again on a 1 square block basis. This material can be highly useful in supplementing CAT models. So if you think about us, we're not an RMS, we're not an AIR, we're not a core logic, but how do you supplement all of that with highly granular information that then feeds in also the real-time and near real-time information? Let's move now for a minute to river flooding. We're going to use as our case study today the Alafia River. And if you go back, do y'all see? Right here, it's the Alafia River near Lithia, Florida. And so we're going to talk about that. There's a fantastic rain gauge. It's a river gauge, one of about 150 in the state of Florida, 10,000 in the United States. And this river gauge captures such things as the water level, the river flow, and also looks at the temperature, which can be really important in the river. The measurements are taken every 15 minutes, and we looked at 15-minute measurements over a decade, 10 full years, to look at the level of risk and the flooding that occurred in Lithia, Florida. We found 6 episodes over a 10-year period, and what you see here is the lag between the heavy rainfall and the flooding. It's about 2 days. So on the left, left on both slides, in green, you'll see the intensity of rainfall that can produce moderate flooding. And then on the right, you see this curve coming about 48 hours later that produced 6 separate incidences of flooding in Lithia. 2012 in June was the most serious of these. Why don't we plot? We got 2012 right there in the half on the right. This plots minor flooding and moderate flooding, these 6 episodes over this 10-year period. What feeds the most into this is intense rainfall. So to look at intense rainfall, and what would we call intense? It's about 2 inches of rain. So if 2 inches of rain fall in a day, in a single day, that's a really intense precipitation event. We'll look at Fort Myers and Naples in 2012, 13, 14, and then looking at the average over the 10-year period. And then we're going to look at it and call it extreme precipitation. And so the dark blue would be 2 inches or more in a single day, and the light blue would be barely any rainfall at all. And the number of precipitation days that are extreme have been increasing over this 10-year period pretty steadily. And so what does this lead to? It leads to an ability to do an index on flash flooding for every single part of Florida on a 1 square block basis, and to assign an index associated with the single square block of intense precipitation producing either flash floods or river flooding. So we'll play the animation, and the dark blue represents the number of intense days of precipitation, and the lighter blue is the less, over a 10-year period here in Florida. We'll single out here Tampa and St. Pete, and you will see a significant amount of variation, just as you did with David's mapping. And the basis of the foundation of this is a single square block area feeding into creating the dark areas versus the light areas. The end result is you see the areas of Tampa and St. Pete that have 45 days of intense rainfall during a single year. If we think about what all this really means and how we wrap it together, I think there are 2 major takeaways. The first, Britt Newhouse of Guy Carp provided this to us. The data is here and the technology is here. They're ready for decision making. We're not talking about something that needs to go out to happen or a big investment. Thanks to the U.S. intelligence community, the investment's been made. The tools have been built, the data sets have been collected, and it's ready to be deployed with decision support for the private sector. All this data is available. It is available through our firm working with Guy Carpenter to be able to bring it to both insurers and reinsurers. The next step is to start overlaying claims and losses on top of the areas of the most extreme and the least precipitation to start putting, as Nikhil put it, a price tag on risk. I want to talk just a second about the flood insurance whisperer. I better make sure she's in the room. Where are you? Lisa Miller, are you here? The rascal. There she is, perfect timing. Lisa, stand right back there. 3 years ago, after the CIA's venture fund reached out to us, we had to make a decision. We were able to assess risk, we were going to be able to select risk, and to be able to explain it. And we wanted to figure out whether we should go into the insurance community right away. And we looked across the country for the most knowledgeable person who had both public service, a deep understanding of the insurance market, and a strong technology and economic background. We found a lady who was the deputy commissioner of insurance in Florida, who'd been the deputy CFO for Florida, and we retained Lisa Miller to advise us. And Lisa spent a couple of months working with us, talking about the insurance industry and its needs, talking about information for risk selection and portfolio manager. And at the end of the day, Lisa said, Bill, here's what y'all ought to do at Weather Analytics. Keep your head down, work on national and global security, financial security, water security, and food security related to risks that are posed around the world. When you do the proof of concept, when you've got a use case, when the U.S. intelligence community will be your reference client, then come back to me and go to Guy Carpenter and talk then about going to the insurance market. We wrapped all that up last summer. We wrapped it up. I think the advice that Lisa gave us was just tremendous. We've had our heads down, Lisa, and now we're ready to bring up our heads and talk to people. And I just want to lead a round of applause for Lisa Miller. Thank you very much.